Hey folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris coming to you live from central Pennsylvania yet again. I appreciate you tuning in today, a little bit earlier start. I very much appreciate those who've shown up for the stream. Bye Donkey for showing up. Kia leboa. Appreciate you being here. And welcome to this special feature with Dr. Peter Hammond. My apologies, my profuse apologies. We had communication snafus on both ends yesterday. This stream was scheduled for yesterday, and Dr. Hammond kindly agreed to come on today. And so we'll have him on here for the next hour. And don't forget, after that, later, about a half hour after that, I'll have Shelton Taguma from Forgotten Voices, the Christian charity based here in central Pennsylvania that helps folks in Zimbabwe. So folks, we're going to get started here in just a moment, but my guest is well known throughout South Africa and in fact many parts of Africa, but I would suspect that most people in the international audience are not particularly familiar with him. He's a man of faith, and he has traveled all over Africa and done quite a bit in his career. Was born in the Western Cape, but as I understand, grew up in Rhodesia. We're going to learn a little bit more about that. And also served in the South African Defense Force in later years, and is involved with Frontline Fellowship. We're going to talk about that and find a little bit about him and his experiences around Africa, and talk about some of the contemporary issues in South Africa. So without any further ado, folks, let me welcome Dr. Peter Hammond. Dr. Hammond, you're on the screen. Welcome to the stream. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much, Chris. Good to be with you. Communication is key, isn't it? And we have enough interference being run by the sensors out there in the thought police. So glad we can connect with this technology.
Well, with two old soldiers, I guess we have to be a little bit embarrassed that we didn't link up properly yesterday. But we'll look the other way, and hopefully the audience will follow us today.
Well, it's different terminology, and we're different hemispheres, and we use different things. So the first thing is, of course, you were using a smartphone. I didn't even have a smartphone. And you were text messaging our landline, and I was emailing you. So it was just getting on the same wavelength.
Yeah. Well, it's you got to be careful there, Doctor. I mean, you're showing your age, not having a mobile phone. That's almost a political statement these days, not having a mobile phone.
It is. I'm old school.
Well, listen, I failed to ask you, because we did speak before this stream. I wanted to ask, are you a rugby fan at all?
Not much. My father ran the Western Province Cricket Union, so our family is far more cricket people.
Okay. Well, I wear a rugby jersey for all my streams, and since you're originally from Cape Town, I wore a Stormers jersey today. I'm a Stormers fan, but that's okay. So not everybody's a rugby fan. I mean, we all have our faults. No, but seriously. So you were born in the Western Cape and then grew up in Rhodesia. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm one of the very few Cape Townians who's actually born in Cape Town. Most people in our city came here afterwards and weren't born here. But I was raised in Bulawayo. My father was a World War II vet. He fought all 6 years of the Second World War, Western Desert Army, which became the 8th Army under Montgomery, Northern Italy after that. And he relocated afterwards to Rhodesia. So straight after the war, he was a hotel manager in Rhodesia. And I was brought up in Bulawayo, just magnificent country. I must say, what a privilege to grow up with wild animals all around. I would be able to, as a young boy, 12 years old even, I could walk out of town and I'd see wildebeest, buffalo, giraffe, zebra, all kind, not in the game reserve, just outside the city limits, walking to Kami ruins, which was 12 miles out of town. My parents wouldn't mind what I was doing as long as I was home and after dark. I had a lion as a pet when I was small. I was just living in a realm of animals, and part of our schooling was going to bush camps where we'd be, as part of our regular schooling, sent for a week a year for bush survival to learn how to survive in the bundu, as they said, being shown tracking, anti-tracking. You could just imagine, I felt sorry for those poor kids brought up in America and Britain. I thought, how boring that must be. Africa's the place to be in. I'm lifelong African, lived here 60 years. Africa's always been my home, and I love it out here, even though we've got hideous governments. We've got some great people and the best wildlife in the world.
No doubt about it. But it's interesting. You said you went to, you basically learned bush tradecraft when you were a kid. Did you have any San who were teaching that? Because they tend to be very good at teaching tracking skills and tradecraft.
I have had on occasion, especially in the South African Army, we would have some bushmen, as we called them, from Bushmen's Battalion 201 Battalion, teaching some tracking. But I must say, we had some very good trackers in the Selous Scouts in Rhodesia, and we had some superb trackers also in South African Army. and 3-2 Battalion had some top-class trackers. So, yes, I must say, living in the bush and learning tracking, anti-tracking, and how to survive in the bush, just magnificent. All the things you can do with baobab trees. I must say, we've made that part of our missionary training schools too.
No, you touched on two units there, which I didn't know if we were going to go that direction, but you mentioned the Zulu Scouts. Lieutenant Colonel Ron Reed Daly's amazing counterinsurgency organization. I've told people for decades that, in my view as a historian, the Zulu Scouts are the single most effective counterinsurgency unit in the 20th century by far. Better than the Malay campaign, which a lot of people attribute, of course, his experience in the Malay campaign. But my view on the Zulu Scouts is they were unbelievably effective. And 3-2 Battalion, of course, over on the other side there in Namibia, Southwest Africa, they were quite effective at what they did. So you're right. Those are some great tracking skills. The Zulu Scouts, I think, were amazing because they started with just white soldiers and had to put face paint on and only go out at night. And then they turned the groups from Zanla and Zipra, and then with only a few exceptions, they all were loyal to the Zulu Scouts until the end. There were a few tragic exceptions. It cost a few lives, but by and large, they fought for Rhodesia and they fought for the Zulu Scouts. What an amazing organization.
Yes, and I had the privilege of meeting Colonel Ron Reed Daly and Chris Schullenberg, who won the highest award in Rhodesian military history as well. And Schillies went from Rhodesian Zulu Scouts to the South African Reconnaissance Commander, and I bumped into him on the Southwest African border as well. Colonel Jan Breitenbach, the founder of 3-2 Battalion, actually joined our mission when he retired from the army. I got this letter on our desk, and here was the legendary Colonel Jan Breitenbach, the veteran of 50-something battles. He fired the first shot of the war in Southwest Africa back in 1966 at Umbalatu, and he joined our mission, and he taught tracking, anti-tracking survival at our frontline mission training camps, and we did missions together in the field. So Colonel Breitenbach, what a legend. I tell you, one of the most incredible sermons I ever heard was from Colonel Breitenbach. Actually heard it several times over. So we were in Southwest Africa, January 1989, and it was before the South African forces withdrew from Southwest Africa. So here we were in 89, and we were ministering in every South African Army base in the whole of Southwest Africa. And at one point, after a month of sleeping in a sleeping bag next to Colonel Breitenbach, traveling around preaching every day, one morning I woke up and the colonel was looking straight at me. He said, "Peter, let's go preach to the communists." And we did. That day, we walked across the border at 3 separate locations, hitchhiked rides on helicopters and Puma helicopters to different places. And we walked into communist Angola, which was during the ceasefire, and preached to the communist forces. So there were MPLA, but there's also Cubans around and so on. And they're standing around holding the whole arsenal of RPDs, PKMs, and AKs, the whole deal, Tokarovs and Makarovs. And Colonel Breitenbach stands up and, speaking through a 3-2 Battalion soldier who spoke fluent Portuguese as the translator, he said, "I'm Colonel Jan Breitenbach of 3-2 Battalion. My men and I, we killed thousands of you communists, thousands. We never had any trouble killing you." He said, "Our only problem was catching you. You ran so fast." "Why did you run so fast? You broke Olympic records running away from the fight. Even when you outnumbered us 10-1, you ran like the spineless, yellow-bellied communist cowards you are." And he said, "Why did you run? Were you afraid to die? Of course you're afraid to die." And he said, "You should be if you knew what was waiting for you the other side of the grave." He said, "You're not real soldiers. You're only brave when you've got some disarmed civilian with his hand tied behind his back with wire. Then you're brave. Then you can bandage him in the back. You can shoot him in the head. But when you face soldiers, real soldiers, South African soldiers, like 3-2 Battalion, you ran like the spineless, yellow-bellied coward you are." He said, "Your God is Karl Marx. Your religion is atheism. Your commissars, they are the priests of Satan. You're lost. You're damned. You're going to burn in hell forever. If you knew what was waiting for you the other side of the grave, you'd crawl across the minefield. You'd beg 3-2 Battalion to show you the way of salvation, Jesus Christ." And as he was preaching like this, my hand went to my Browning high power on my hip, and I thought, the colonel wants a short way to glory. I didn't think we'd see the sunset that day. And the colonel did this not once, but 3 times at 3 separate locations. He riled them up, and I saw the commies fingering the weapons, and, we just had a couple of 9mm between us. And I didn't know what the colonel was up to. He was a brave man, obviously, but we survived that day. only when we got back home, we got home really feeling good, really feeling great. We'd seen the commies in eyes. We really rubbed their noses in it, and we came back feeling like we'd had a great day. And as we got off the helicopter and walked to our base camp, which was at Ruakana at that stage, the commandant came out and he said, "Colonel, the lions have been humming today, and Sector 10 has been talking to the Bastion. The Bastion's been talking to Fort Rakota. They've been talking with the Foreign Affairs. Pickford is hopping mad and demanding that you and Hammond get expelled from the country. You guys, everything you've got is cancelled, and we're to ship you out of here tomorrow." So Colonel Breitmark fired the first shots of the war. 26 years combat for South African Army in this war, and they expelled him from the country for preaching the gospel to the commies and telling them that they no good, low down, yellow-bellied cowards. And well, that's just one anecdote about Colonel Breitenbach.
Well, I thought that perhaps you're going to say that some of them converted to Christianity on the spot, but apparently that didn't happen. Quite an interesting story there. Yeah, Colonel Jan Breitenbach, who of course didn't become a general officer. Gee, I wonder why. The authorities probably weren't too happy with him. But yeah, no, he is quite the legend in many respects, and not just because of 3-2 Battalion, as you point out. That's let's come back to that, because we'll talk more about the border war a bit. That'll be interesting. But there's also, I want to get back to you talking about teaching tradecraft in the mission. That's fascinating. But before we get there, let's get back to Rhodesia very quickly, because you grew up in Bulawayo. I've been to Bulawayo many times. It's a lovely, quaint town. I enjoy it. But the area around it is amazing. Matopos National Park, just south of there, where Cecil Rhodes is buried. I mean, it's like looking at the surface of Mars with little gumdrop hills all over the place. I'm going to assume that you've been to Matopos, and you've probably been to that site as well.
Oh, yes, many times. Just loved it. I mean, and I roamed around there as a youngster. This is a strange thing. I was safer and freer in Rhodesia at war than we are at peace in our own countries right now, because our country, everyone is armed. All the women carried guns. You'd see them in the shops. Mothers would have their revolvers or pistols on their hips, or row gun, 9mm submachine gun slung over their shoulder. As farmers hanging up the washing, so everyone was armed. There's always rifles everywhere. And I grew up as a youngster knowing you never switch on the light without first closing the curtains. You never open the door without first switching off the light. You never frame yourself against the light, because every farmer, every household was a target. And when we went on school outings, the teachers carried machine guns, went on roads endangered by landmines and ambushes. And I must admit, as a youngster, I didn't find this terrifying. I found this exciting. I thought it was a fun place to grow up. And I wasn't aware of all the trauma that was involved in the war. And fortunately, it didn't hit our family personally. But my brother served in the Rhodesian army, and I was too young for the Rhodesian war. I served in the South African Army later in Southwest Africa and Angola. But wow, what a privilege to grow up in a country like Rhodesia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a very different time. You know, it's the only other country that comes to mind for me in which it had a similar, I don't want to say a siege mentality, although it really was a siege mentality, particularly if you were up around Kariba or on the eastern and then Mashonaland along the borders with Mozambique. It really was a siege mentality. A lot of farmers and their families brutally murdered there. Fortunately, in Montebello, not as bad, but you still had problems. But it was much worse in other places. But the other place that reminds me is places I've been is Israel. In Israel, everyone's got a rifle, everyone's got a weapon walking around, and with good reason. It's a country under siege all the time. In fact, soldiers aren't allowed to go anywhere, even on holiday, without their weapon. So, I mean, because in Israel, you know, if you lose, it's game over. There's no reset. There's no tomorrow. It's all over. And I suspect that you were a youngster, but for your parents and for those growing up in Rhodesia, it may have felt that way for them as well. There's no tomorrow. We have to be prepared, and you don't get a second chance here. Hence the reasons you were taught to not shadow yourself against a window and be careful of the curtains and lights. Good safety tips, things I've also exercised in many countries where I've been stationed around the world, and it has fortunately kept me alive. So it worked out pretty well. So in Rhodesia, we had some brilliant people in. I had the privilege of knowing Ian Smith, because my father's a hotel manager at the Bulawayo Club. I would sometimes see the president, Clifford DuPont, or the Prime Minister, Ian Smith, coming along to the to Bulawayo Club. Also, General Walls and others would be regular visitors there.
And so I even met Ian Smith when I was 14. And then later, when I was running this mission across the border into Mozambique and Angola, Ian Smith summoned me to his home, his daughter's home in Hout Bay, actually. He stayed in his farm until they kicked him off that farm. And so he wanted to know what we were doing. And for the last 20 years of Ian Smith's life, I would have a tea and lunch and supper with him, and we'd meet together and pray and study the Bible and discuss history. And I managed to interview him for the radio. So it was such a privilege to meet a man like that. And he wasn't a politician. He was a farmer. He was an airman. He was a real man. And he was the only politician, you could say, if you use that word, who I really was proud to meet. And I felt he was straight the level. He said what he meant what he said. There was no nonsense about him. And Ian Smith was, the only criticism I'd have of him is that he is too honorable. I asked Ian Smith once on radio, Mr. Smith, were you not perhaps too honorable? Could you not have just accepted the peace talks, the fearless or Tiger talks, and taken independence on the grounds that the British demanded, and then afterwards had a referendum and done what you thought was right for the country? And Ian Smith rose to his full height, and he's a tall man in his chair. He looked at me with absolute shock and horror. He said, we couldn't have done that. That wouldn't have been honest. We couldn't build Rhodesia on a lie. What kind of example would that be to the Africans? He looked at me in disappointment, I think, that I could have even brought that up. And I thought, that's my only criticism of Ian Smith. He is such an honorable man. He's dealing with duplicitous, backstabbing cowards at the British Foreign Office. And unfortunately, he felt he had to be true to his word. And, I'm not that honorable. In the course of Bible smuggling behind the Iron Curtain to communist countries, I've had to lie at border posts, and I have no compunction with that, because in war, I don't think people who want to torture and maim people have any right to information they're going to abuse. And the British Foreign Office were as treacherous as they came. To think that Ian Smith fought for Britain in the Second World War. He flew in the Royal Rhodesian Air Force all 6 years. He was shot down twice, behind enemy lines 5 months, and yet they forbade him to come to Britain for the Battle of Britain. What was it? I think it was the 25th anniversary of it, and he wasn't allowed to come there. Now, he had flown in Royal Rhodesian Air Force throughout the war, and they would not let him come to London for the celebrations, even though Rhodesians fought and were part of the Battle of Britain. That's how petty the characters were at that stage.
Sorry, go ahead.
Ian Smith said, we were never beaten by our enemies. We were betrayed by our friends.
Absolutely, and in a moment I'll get to one of those betrayals. But before that, there's no honor among rogues. They don't care what you've done for them at all. I mean, look at what the African National Congress did on behest of their masters in Beijing, denying the Dalai Lama a visa to come to South Africa twice. The Dalai Lama, he's so dangerous. He walks around with hand grenades and submachine guns. No, the Dalai Lama, because of the Chinese illegally have occupied his country of Tibet and deposed him as a child, he's a threat to them, and they're terrified of him. So he was supposed to come there for the International Racism Conference. The ANC denied him a visa to come for that. Then they denied him a visa for Bishop Desmond Tutu's 80th birthday celebration. I mean, come on, how petty is that? How stupid is that? That man did more for the liberation struggle in South Africa than the ANC claims to have done, quite frankly. He was an international voice that stood up for ending apartheid, whether you believe in that or not. I'm not talking you or me, I'm talking about just people in general, whether one believes in it or not. The guy did more to end apartheid than most South Africans ever did. And they deny him a visa because their masters in Beijing don't want him to come to South Africa and get attention. It's really, there's no honor amongst rogues. And it's the same thing that happened to Ian Smith in the United Kingdom. He fought for their freedom and saved the United Kingdom from the Nazi onslaught. And that's his reward. So, yeah, I'm with you, Dr. Hammond. It's disgraceful. And we see it here, too. It's just a matter of time before these leftists take control in this country and they start denigrating veterans and active service members again. The respect that we have as uniformed members, which is over 90% of the public respects the military, will not last once these rogues get into power. And they're trying very hard on this side of the Atlantic. But the betrayal I'm talking about, of course, is Forster's betrayal of Rhodesia. Whether you support Rhodesia or not, one cannot deny that Forster betrayed the Rhodesians in pulling back the British South African police, the helicopters, the mechanics, and then turning his back on them in the late 70s, forcing them to the table at a disadvantageous stage. And it's a shame because Smith was trying to come to the table for years before that. And of course, he was accused of equivocating. But my recollection is it was the other side primarily that was equivocating because they weren't united. You had two different groups that wanted different things, and they were both jockeying for advantage. And once they had the numbers, overwhelming numbers, and 70% of the state's budget was paid for security, the handwriting was on the wall, and that's when Forster turned his back. So I think that's a great betrayal as well. And speaking of which, I have Ian Smith's autobiography, The Great Betrayal. It's quite a well-written one.
Well worth reading, and yes, it's quite tragic to see how I expected to read about the betrayal of Britain and America. Mm-hmm. What horrified me was to read about the betrayal from the South African government, the National Party-run, Broederbond-run National Party, under B.J. Foster in particular. And my brother was in the Rhodesian army at the time and was mentioning how they were running out of medicines, they're running out of ammunition, they were struggling with fuel. He was outside, not that far from Salisbury, not even hours flight away, and with a man bleeding to death for lack of Casevac. And they were so short of helicopters, so short of fuel, so short of medicines. And the terrorists were better supplied and more numerous than the Rhodesian security forces. And that was as a direct result of B.J. Foster, along with Kissinger. Henry Kissinger and B.J. Foster cooked up the betrayal. And this is well documented by Ian Smith in The Great Betrayal. Well worth reading that book.
No, absolutely. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping here real quick, Dr. Hammond. So Leon van Heerden is excited. He's here. He came yesterday, and you weren't here. He was very disappointed. So our apologies to Leon, and thanks for coming back today to catch this. We really appreciate it. And then a couple super chats came in. Lee Roberts sent a British pound super chat. That's real money, so we like that. He said, "Sorry I'm late." Well, Lee, you're welcome to come in anytime. Glad to have you here. And then we just got a super chat, and this, I'm not familiar with this story. I don't know if you mind sharing this story, Dr. Hammond, but Bismarck Bear said, "Can you tell us the Mandela picture prayer story?"
Yes. So back in 1995 and 1996, I led two large Christian Voice marches. We led 30,000 people to Parliament in 1995 in May, and another 10,000 in 96, protesting against Mandela's plans to paganize the country and to secularize the country and legalize abortion, pornography, homosexuality, perversion, the whole deal. So I led these marches, delivered memorandums at Parliament. And interestingly enough, at the march in 95, the man who came out to receive this was Cyril Ramaphosa, who then was the chairman of the Constitutional Convention that was drawing up the new constitution. And Cyril Ramaphosa came out, and he was frankly terrified, and his eyes wide, and you could see he's absolutely sweating with fear, because this is the biggest march Cape Town ever seen. And I heard from people inside that the ANC thought the days were numbered and they were going to all get torn apart and hung from street lamps. Well, of course, Christians don't do that sort of thing. We play nice and we behave ourselves. So, but he comes out there to receive this, and apparently he's pushed out the door because nobody else wanted to go. And so he came to receive our memorandum, and he's standing there by the ladder that leads up to the vehicle truck where we had our actual microphone and speakers, and he's going to receive the memorandum. And he's standing at the foot of the steps, and he sees standing next to me a Zulu friend of mine, Fano Sibisi. He said, "Brother, can I borrow your Bible?" And he, without waiting for an answer, snatches this leather-bound black Bible out of the hands of Fano Sibisi, our Zulu friend, and dashes up on top. And he stands up there and he lifts up this Bible above his head, and he said, "I'm also a Christian. Look, I bring my Bible to Parliament with me every day." And the people roared and cheered, and I turned to Fano, and Fano stared at me, and we were both aghast. We thought he knew that we knew that he was lying, but he obviously didn't care, because most people wouldn't know. And that was our first encounter with Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, the next year, I marched to Parliament against Mandela's paganization, and a man came out from the president's office and summoned me to Nelson Mandela's presidential mansion, which he called Genadendal, basically the old British which Cecil Rhodes' estate. So the first thing Nelson Mandela says, now he's the president, this is May 1996. First thing he says to me when I arrived, he said, "So, Mr. Hammond, what were you doing during the years of struggle?" And I said, "I was fighting people like you, sir." And he laughed and he slapped his knee and he stood up and he came over and he shook my hand a second time and he said, "I'm so happy to meet an honest white man." He said, "All the whites I've met up till now, they say that they supported me. And I wondered how the National Party stayed in power for so many years when everyone supported me and didn't support apartheid." And I said, "Well, make no mistake, Mr. President, we were not fighting for apartheid. We were fighting against communism, against terrorism." So Mandela leaned back and he said, "Apartheid was the greatest evil in the history of the world." I said, "I cannot agree with that, Mr. President. That prize has to go to your friends and supporters, the communists." The communists have in the 20th century, just between 1917 and 1991, according to the Black Book Communism, killed over 100 million of their own people. Killed. Not foreigners killed in war, civilians killed in peace, killed by their own governments. 100 million corpses in the 20th century alone. And I said, as he hadn't moved a muscle, he is just staring at me impassively. I said, that includes the 66 million killed under Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin in the Soviet Union. The 69 million killed under Mao Zedong in China isn't included in this because their files aren't opened yet, and that hasn't been added to this list. But it does include also the 3 million killed in communist China, communist Vietnam, and it does include the millions killed in Cambodia, 40% of the population under Khmer Rouge. He's still silent, so I carried on through the Red Terror in Mengistu's Ethiopia, and I knew Mengistu was coming into South Africa at that time. He is being protected in Zimbabwe, even though international genocide treaties wanted for him. When he came to South Africa at about that time for medical care in Joburg, the Southern government didn't hand him over to the International Court of Justice. And I carried on through Mozambique and Angola to his pal Fidel Castro's Cuba. And he sat there very impassively. And when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and he sort of stared off into space. And he said, "When I was a prisoner of the Boers on Robben Island, they would not let me wear sunglasses." Now, that's an interesting comment, because if you go to Robben Island and to Gateway to Robben Island and Waterfront Cape Town, they've got a tall, massive Chairman Mao-sized picture of Nelson Mandela leaning on his spade by his garden on Robben Island, wearing sunglasses. So somewhere along the line, I must let him have sunglasses, but maybe initially they didn't. And so I answered him when he finished. I said, "Mr. Mandela, my eyes are also sensitive to the sun, and I can understand how unpleasant that must be. But I'm sure you'll agree this hardly compares with the atrocities documented by Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago." He then started talking about the evils of apartheid separating human beings from one another. And I said, "Mr. Mandela, you are questioning the Christianity of people who 40 years ago legalized apartheid. But I tell you, it won't be 40 years from now, Mr. President. People question your humanity for legalizing abortion. You have swapped apartheid with abortion, discrimination on the basis of race with discrimination on the basis of age. And abortion doesn't simply assign a different group area or different citizenship or separate voters' rolls. This takes the baby's life." I said, "Abortion is worse than apartheid.
It's murder."
And while he was talking about this, we had a bit of like a tennis match back and forth. I brought up war is an example of separating people of the same family and shooting people in the back when they wanted to move away from socialist utopia into a free nation like West Berlin. But I said, and your Shashaba, that's the magazine of the ANC, was printed in East Germany by the Stasi. And we had this over, back and forth dealing with a whole lot of things.
Connection's hanging up there on us.
Sorry?
Your connection's hanging up on us. You last we heard was the Stasi newspaper.
Yes. He then asked about the woman who is with us, who had actually quit.
Hung up again.
Pro-choice is a lie. Babies don't choose to die. And as we had about an hour of this backwards and forwards, at the end, Nelson Mandela said, he stood up and he said, "Photographs now." And I didn't mean to be insulting. I really was trying to be polite, but I said, "No, thank you. I hadn't brought cameras. What am I going to do with pictures of me and Nelson Mandela?" And he looked so shocked. His jaw dropped down. His mouth was open. Maybe we were the first people he met that didn't want the pictures taken with him. But I said, but we would like to pray with you, Mr. Mandela. He said, no, that's very private. I'd rather not. He looked very awkward. And I pretended I hadn't heard. And I put my hand on his one shoulder. And Dominique Stevenster, who was with me, put a hand on the other shoulder. And we prayed, Lord Jesus, will you not give Nelson Mandela one moment's rest until he does what he knows is right, until he protects innocent preborn babies from the violence and injustice of abortion. Lord God, may not give Mr. Mandela peace until he does what he knows is right and bows his knee to you as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We prayed along this line. When we had finished, he still looked outwardly calm, but I could see he was steaming. And he said, my door is always open to you, Mr. Hammond. I'm always responsive to the concerns of your constituency. Now, we marched on Tuesday. I was summoned on Thursday. Monday morning, front door knocks, open door. There are two senior investigators of the Inland Revenue Service, our South African Revenue Service, like your IRS. And they started a 7-year audit. For 7 years, they audited us. They went back 6 years. So we had a 13-year audit effectively. Everything of myself personally, my wife, our mission, every ministry we involved in, they wanted sworn affidavits, even for grandparents' gifts for our child's kidney transplant and kidney failure donations and petty. In fact, we had to get a special lawyer and accountant just to keep us out of jail. And it was like the Clintonistas. They would put the revenue service on people they didn't like. And Nelson Mandela was very polite to us, but he set his dogs on us. And this one lawyer said to us, I've never seen anything so petty. Your budget's miniature. He said, you're a very small economic. He said, senior investigators of the revenue service. He said, this is unbelievable. You've really upset some important people. And well, that was our encounter with Nelson Mandela.
But see, that's not the point. It's not a question of whether you make money or you're big. It's a question of using the state to abuse you because you had the temerity to challenge the great man who was astounded. I think the one most fascinating comment that you made there is that he was surprised that no one wanted his photograph. And also he said, it's nice to meet an honest white man who is telling the truth because, yeah, Nelson Mandela was surrounded by sycophants, particularly white liberals in the African National Congress who found it their place to tell the old man what they thought he wanted to hear. And so he was probably shocked by that. And it shows the venal nature of the individual that instead of taking that to heart, that he took offense and decided to get even with you with the instruments of the state. Now, that's no different than Barack Obama using the IRS and Lois Lerner going after Tea Party political groups, denying them tax-exempt status, even though they're tax-exempt organizations. Barack Obama and the deep state starting illegal, unlawful, unconstitutional investigations against General Flynn, Carter Page, and a host of other people, including the president of the United States, incoming president, and then president. The abuse of the state by these people is just unbelievable. That's why I caution people in South Africa. They keep talking about farmland and expropriation without compensation. Yeah, that's part of it, but you're missing the boat entirely. Expropriation without compensation is to give a tool to the state so they can suppress your thought and your speech. Because let's go forward 10 years from now and there's expropriation without compensation as the law of the land. If you start speaking about the ANC, if they're the ruling party and they're unhappy, they'll simply come to you and say, listen, do you not like your Audi A7? Is there something wrong? You don't like the house you live in? The money you have in your retirement account? We're taking that tomorrow. But there's no buts. They don't have to explain it. They don't justify it. It's the law. It's legal. Just like apartheid, it's legal. So they can do what they like. And that's the purpose of expropriation without compensation. It's to pilfer and it's to plunder and it is to pressure people to not speak up against the state. And people are missing that entirely. They don't realize that this will be used as a political tool. And it doesn't have to be the ANC. It could be another political party in power at some point in history. And that political party will use this instrument to oppress the people and end free speech. And that's the bottom line. People need to be focused on that.
The word that they use a lot in Africa is intimidate. And I think this is the thing. They're all tools of intimidation. And unfortunately, it's been awfully successful because a lot of South African, I'm talking about the white South Africans in particular, are gaslighted and they are Stockholm syndromed and they are actually in so many ways guilt manipulated to where they are wanting to believe the best of the government, like Ramaphoria, where you find so many South Africans, even though Ramaphosa has spoken about expropriation of compensation, there's a lot of people who believe, oh, he's our savior. And literally you hear the most bizarre things, people wanting to believe the best of the very people who want to abuse them. I think it's like the Stockholm Syndrome. And now we see it in South Africa.
No, absolutely. Folks, you're listening to Indaba Africa, Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa channel. This is Chris coming to you live from central Pennsylvania. And my special feature guest today is Dr. Peter Hammond. We're going to start talking about faith and about fellowship here in a short moment. But we've been talking a bit about his growing up and maturation in Rhodesia, outside Bulawayo, Matopos, and also some of the Bush War. Quite a few topics in this short half hour we've been talking already, and quite a few more to go in the next 25 minutes. But just had a comment from Recreation. Recreation says, "Hi, Dr. Peter. Sorry I said bad things about you yesterday." To be fair, a lot of people were very excited about you coming on the channel, and when I didn't know where you were and we had a miscommunication, some people got angry. Nobody was abusive, but they got angry. So folks, just don't get angry. You know, it's things happen. We don't always have control of things. There's a communication snafu. So we're very grateful that Dr. Hammond is available today, and he came on the channel. So once again, thank you, Dr. Hammond, for coming on, and don't beat yourself. No self-flagellation there, Recreation. You apologize. Let's move on from it. Anyway, so and Recreation wasn't the only one that was unhappy, but anyway, so thank you so much for coming back today and tuning in. And for the 100+ people currently watching the show, thank you so much for tuning in. We did this at a little bit different time. I don't usually stream at this hour, but I have another stream that was already scheduled, and Dr. Hammond had this hour free, so we said let's do it this time. And this time we got our communication straight. So now I feel like I'm a proper soldier back in the bush here and using the radio signals properly. So Dr. Hammond, let's talk a little bit now. Let me explain something, and then I'll get you to go on this topic. So when I was a young man and I was studying history in high school, I used to look at these photographs from the First World War, and I'd see the Russian armies, the Russian Empire on the Eastern Front, you know, before the Battle of Tannenberg and things like that. And you see thousands of soldiers, and you see this Russian Orthodox priest out there blessing them, and they're all on their knees saying prayer. And of course, I went to church. I was a Methodist, and I sang in the choir, and I was a person of faith, but not deep faith particularly. But I went. I mean, it was expected. And that was the sort of thing I did. But I'm like, why are there chaplains? Why does the military have people of faith in uniform? Isn't it about killing people and things like? I was a young man, okay, and so I started paying attention and studying, and I realized that chaplains are critically important for the military. I mean, when you're in uniform, and if you're sent into conflict, unfortunately, which happens to too many of us, the only thing you have is your teammates around you and your faith, and that's it. And whether you get back or not is oftentimes completely out of your control. So can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you served in uniform, you were a soldier, and you're obviously a person of faith. And how did that come about? And was that a transition in life, or was it always a big part of your life?
No, it certainly wasn't a big part of my life. It wasn't any part of my life. I was brought up in a very secular family. My father called himself an agnostic, and so I used the term agnostic too, not that I exactly knew what that meant. I didn't really believe much. I suppose I thought there was a God, but I didn't really think you could have a relationship with him, or, you know, prayer was a ritual that some people did, nothing we did. So in my family, there was no such thing as reading the Bible or prayer, not even grace before meals. We never went to church, never went to Sunday school. However, having said that, the Rhodesian schools did begin every day with a Bible reading, hymn singing, and prayer. I must say, it went straight over my head. Never, I don't think a spiritual thought passed my brain before I was 17. But interestingly enough, despite being brought up with a somewhat religious atmosphere at the schools in Rhodesia, there was nothing but secularization in my family and home. When I came to South Africa, I bumped into Christians right, left, and center. It was staggering. And so it's 1977. I'm 17 years old. I'm in matric, which was final year at high school. And I'm just coming across, it seemed like the whole of South Africa was Christian. Well, along comes Sunday, and like I would do in Rhodesia, I headed off to the local cinema, which was actually just across the street from where I was living. And people were pouring in. I thought, boy, they're well dressed. Yeah, ties and jackets, and ladies with gloves and hats and dresses and all this. So I get in, and I'm thinking, we don't seem to have paid. This is strange. And then they started to sing hymns, and I thought, this is strange, but maybe that's what South Africans do on Sundays before cinemas. And I'm still expecting the film. A man gets up and starts preaching, and I'm looking up here. There's cinema about 900 seats, and it's packed, and I'm towards the front. And so I was kind of ambushed. You know, there I go, honestly, to see a film, and I'm suddenly caught up in this Baptist evangelistic rally. I'm deeply uncomfortable, and I feel like I'm in the wrong place, and I shouldn't be here. But as the speaker, Rex Matthew, laid out what Jesus had suffered and done for us, he said, what have you ever done for God? And I was speechless. I mean, what could I say? What had I done for God? And I knew I had not once, even in my entire life, said so much as thank you to God, not for anything. And suddenly coming to my mind is stories from my father in North Africa, being bombed by the Africa Corps, and in London during the Blitz, and my dad falling on his parade ground, tilting his helmet to cover his neck as he saw Dornier 111s come over and his barracks turned to matchsticks, and stories from my mother, who's in Berlin, going through the 1,000 bomber raids as a young girl from age 6 on. And I'm thinking, because the preacher's saying, if God's ever preserved your life, it's been for a reason. And suddenly the stories come back, how so many things as a youngster, I was meant to die, and my mother was taking thalidomide tablets. They wanted to do an abortion because thalidomide babies are coming out horribly deformed. I was born 1960 and January 1960. So even in South Africa, they were going to allow abortions in that case because thalidomide, which counteracted morning sickness, had the unexpected effect of babies being born without arms and legs and so on.
Yeah, there was a large number of a whole generation of Germans that was the case. And when I lived in Germany the first time, you saw thousands of Germans with tiny little hands and almost non-existent arms. It was and same sort. It's really horrific what happened with that pill. But I'm sorry to mean to interrupt. That just for people aren't familiar with it. A lot of people aren't familiar with that. Was a truly horrific thing that took place where medicine. Remember, the science is never settled, and this is an example of it. How they got it horribly wrong.
They did indeed, and so suddenly, for the first time in my life, I'm thinking, I need to be grateful to God, whoever he is, wherever he is. And I've never said thank you for anything. I haven't been grateful for anything. I've taken so much for granted, including my parents' lives. And of course, if they had died, I wouldn't be around. And so cogs are starting to move, and I'm feeling this real sense of gratitude. And so when the altar call was given, I actually stood up and went forward, which is extraordinary. So I could say the first time I heard the gospel, I went forward, and the strangest thing, as I knelt and committed my life to Christ in front of the church, and I have no idea what everyone else was doing. I don't know if others went forward. I might have been the only one. I don't know. But I was overwhelmed with this conviction that I was called to missions. Now, at that moment, I'd never met a missionary. The only missionary I'd ever heard of was David Livingstone. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I didn't even know he was a missionary. I just knew he was a great explorer. So I didn't even know he's a missionary at this stage. So in the last 43 years, I've never doubted that I'm called to missions. And from that day, I went back home and my life was transformed. And of course, the first missionary who came past our church shortly after that, I joined his mission, which happened to be Hospital Christian Fellowship. And then my call up for the military came, and I went into the army and stood up on the first Sunday in the army at the chaplain service and said, "Chaplain, may I speak?" And he let me, and I turned around, and I must say, probably one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, worse than later being under fire. But I turned and faced the 600 odd men that was in my company. We'd be whittled down to 123 selection over the next few weeks, but at that stage, about 600 of us crammed in there. They all looked like me, shorn hair, brown uniforms, and I said, I love the Lord Jesus Christ, and I want to honor him in my next 2 years here. If anyone else feels the same, please see me afterwards. Let's start a Bible study and prayer fellowship. And I sat down, and I'd done it. But out of that grew our Bible study and prayer fellowship, which met every night for the next 2 years. Of course, some nights it wasn't possible because we were en route marches on, but whenever we were in base, we were or on the border, we were meeting if at all possible. And out of it, it grew from 3 to 6 to 12. By the end of third phase, there were over 12 of us. And then, there were 24 by the end of third phase. At the end of our 2 years national service, there were over 80 of us that gathered at our final Thanksgiving from 3 companies. And that's where our mission began, Frontline Fellowship. And we were, the vision was, after all-night prayer meetings and things like this in the chapel at the Army, 6th South African Infantry, we would recruit Christians from military background to go into war-torn communist countries to smuggle Bibles and to help the persecuted churches. That was the vision. And that was 40 years ago, over 40 years ago. And this mission, I've been arrested and imprisoned and rocketed and strafed and bombed and all sorts of things, and church services that we've been bombed and end up in communist prisons and in front of firing squads on a couple of occasions too. So it's an extraordinary adventure, and that South Africans didn't have cinemas on Sundays in honor of the Lord's Day back then.
It's a fascinating story, Dr. Hammond. Quite an amazing journey. Well, let's shift a little bit because most of the countries looking at what you guys do, you evangelize in war zones, you assist persecuted churches, you work for Reformation Revival across Africa. But you work in many countries. Most are in Southern Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Malawi. But then you've also got Nigeria and Sudan further afield. The Nigeria is interesting. It's a massive country. But Sudan is especially interesting because of its history. And I'll ask you specifically in a moment about whether your focus is on South Sudan or it's in the northern part, because, of course, you've got this big divide, primarily Muslim in the north, and South Sudan is primarily a Christian country with some animus there. But I don't know if you noticed it. You probably did. You're probably tracking this. But it may be window dressing. We'll see if it's for real. But of course, Sudan has been dangerous for Christians because of the implementation of Sharia law and applying to everyone, whether you are a Muslim or not. But just a few months ago, earlier this year, Sudan, in an effort to get off the bad boy list with the United States, agreed to rescind the law against non-Muslims. So if you're not a Muslim, if you're a Jew or a Christian or someone else in Sudan, Sharia no longer applies to you, at least in practice. We'll see if it happens going forward. They've also set up a $435 million, or setting up a $435 million compensation fund for victims of their state-sponsored terrorism, all in an effort to come off the list. And of course, this is all through the auspices of Donald Trump, who's been pushing Sudan very hard. Sudan also is recognizing Israel. Can you imagine that? That's shocking beyond belief. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Are you keeping up on events in Sudan, or are we aware of these things?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, definitely. And we've been involved in both sides. So I first went to Sudan in 1995. So we've had a 25-year work there. During that time, we've taken over 800,000 Bibles and Christian books smuggled into this officially Islamic country. Now, I was arguing with Colonel John Garang and Commander Salva Kiir, the second commander of the SPLA, that they needed to be fighting for independence and secession. And we're talking about 24 years ago, they were saying that's not possible. In fact, as recently as 2001, I was arguing with Commander Salva Kiir at his base headquarters in Yei, that in Equatoria, that nothing less than complete independence would do, because there'll always be a persecuted black minority in a majority Islamic Arab state unless they redraw the map, and then there can be a majority in their own country. And they were saying it's not possible. The map's never been redrawn since the Berlin Conference of 1885. And I was arguing with them quite solidly on this. And interesting that Commander Salva Kiir, just 10 years after he had been saying to me it will never happen, he was president of an independent South Sudan. So we are still working in both southern and northern Sudan. And by the way, this, of course, has led me to be heavily involved in promoting Cape Independence and being the chairman of the Cape Independence Forum, because I saw what happened in Croatia and Slovenia and Slovakia, up in the old Czechoslovakia and old Yugoslavia, and Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And I've seen independence coming out of a lot of the communist countries where the people wanted decentralization, freedom, and seeing how successful those countries have been. And so I was very strongly advocating, having worked behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s up in Europe, in Eastern Europe, I was knowing that South Sudan's only real hope long-term for stability and peace is independence. And after the success of the South Sudan venture, I focused on Cape Town. I thought, the Western Cape should be an independent country. We were an independent country. We exist.
Looks like he's frozen up on the data there. Hopefully it'll come back in just a moment, folks. It's Dr. Peter Hammond.
1995.
Oh, there he is.
South Sudan. Sorry?
No, it broke up again. We lost everything you said, so sorry. That's all right. But go ahead and continue where you're at. So I'm sorry about that. Your data connection is flaking out now and then. But
it's not surprising. So it was scorched earth. It was combing, Tamsita called it, draining the sea to catch fish. We're working behind the Nuba Mountains, behind the lines in northern Sudan as well, and just poison, the wells poisoned, the crops destroyed, the churches burned, the towns destroyed. One church I ministered in Kauda in the Nuba Mountains had been bombed 18 times in the previous 12 months. The one church in South Sudan in Lui had been bombed 10 times in just the space of 2 years. Our mission base we set up in Sudan at Mundri was bombed 10 times in about an 18-month period as well. About 140 bomb craters around it. It's just extraordinary. And today, the amazing thing is the government of Sudan has not only recognized South Sudan's independence, but now they're doing peace negotiations with the Nuba Christians of South Kordofan and Nuba Mountains. They have stopped defensive actions in Darfur and in the Blue Nile. They seem to have abandoned Sharia law. They've abolished the apostasy laws under which Christians were executed, the blasphemy laws under which Christians who were evangelists could be executed for offending Muhammad, they said, under blasphemy laws. They've abolished flogging. They've abolished flogging of women. Women's rights of some sort have been instituted. There's a whole range of extraordinary things. But one of the most amazing to me is that Omar al-Bashir, the dictator for almost 30 years, was arrested last year, has been put on trial this year. And they're even talking about handing him over to the International Court of Justice, the ICC in The Hague, for his genocide and other crimes. So, look, as you said, early days, but this does look like it's passed beyond window dressing at the moment. I would say this is very impressive. But you know what the people in the Nuba Mountains say is the most interesting of all? Because we started to see something happening more than 3.5 years ago. 3.5 years ago, we started to see this. We went to the Nuba Mountains, and lo and behold, it was people were down from the mountains, on the plain, they were planting their crops, they were building schools, they were digging wells. We thought, how is this possible? I mean, I've been to Nuba Mountains before, and it just was scorched earth, a terror zone. And my son-in-law and several of the other missionaries went up, and this is peace. Well, how's this possible? No, they say that Donald Trump didn't alter the deal with the Sudan government. He said, I know what you want. You want sanctions ended, economic sanctions ended, and to be taken off the terror watch list. You know what I want? End to all bombings and hostile actions in South Kordofan, the Nuba Mountains, Darfur, and Blue Nile. And after you have ceased all hostile actions for 12 months, I'll lift economic sanctions. And once you've had no violence for, I think it was 48 months, then we will lift 24 months, we'll lift the terror watch list. And lo and behold, for the last 3.5 years, there has been peace in the Nuba Mountains. There's been no bombings, no ground offensives. And we have been able to do an unprecedented amount of distribution of Bibles and books and work, including in 260 schools. Now, there weren't 26 schools when I started the work there in 96. But the peace that's come now, I don't know how many people in America know that Donald Trump has brought about such saving of lives in just Sudan, one example. And I wouldn't know about that if I was watching the lamestream media. We only know about that because we've actually been on the ground and we've seen the fruit.
Dr. Hammond, of course they don't know about it because the media are in collusion and undermining this administration because they hate Trump. Listen, I famously am on record as being a person who thought that he was a fraud, and that nonetheless I voted for him, of course, because I could never bring myself to vote for a felon like Hillary Clinton, who violated our Espionage Act. As a counterintelligence agent, I know she violated the act. She should be in federal prison. But we put soldiers in prison for far less. Intent is not part of the statute. But anyway, so they've not even talked about Africa. All they said is he's done nothing in Africa, which is also a lie. He's done a fair amount in Africa, but not nearly as much that got people's attention. And they'll never talk about his success there, just like they'll never give him credit for Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, also coming to peace terms with Israel, the peace breaking out in the Middle East, the ending of the caliphate in Syria, the saving of what was left of the cities who were being persecuted beyond belief and sold as sex slaves and murdered outright, all of which was ended by Donald Trump. Despite treasonous behavior amongst some of our flag officers, amongst officials in our government, it's amazing what this man accomplished in 4 years. And if he in fact leaves office, it will be a tragedy for the world, not just for the United States. And this is from a guy that doesn't like Donald Trump, but I'm honest, and that's the difference here. So I have to say this: you are amazingly a fascinating, interesting guy, and we have so much in common so far as interest and experiences and places we've been, whether it's Southwest Africa or it's Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, or South Africa, Malawi. The list goes on, and even Sudan. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in 2011. In 2011, of course, South Sudan, got their independence. And 2 years later, of course, it imploded when Salva Kiir and Riek Machar descended into civil war. And people were shocked that there was a civil war. And I said, "You're shocked?" I said, "I'm shocked that it lasted 2 years, knowing what's going on between these two people. The fact that they had peace for 2 years was a major achievement in my book." But when it happened, I was in Uganda. I was the security cooperation officer there, and we had 3 simultaneous named operations going on. We had the Lord's Resistance Army fight with the Special Forces, which I was supporting from our air base in Entebbe, not our air base, but our warehouse that we used at the base there. And then also we did a peacekeeping movement of troops from Rwanda and Burundi through Entebbe into the Central African Republic. Famously where the SANDF got waxed in a battle in which they were very unprepared for. But we sent peacekeepers there through Entebbe at the same time. And finally, starting, I think it was on the 21st of December of 2013, we sent Osprey tilt rotor, aircraft up to Bor to evacuate Americans from the combat zone. And the aircraft were fired upon. So they came back. We had 4 critically wounded on the lead aircraft. And when I got in the back of that aircraft after we evacuated these guys, there's no level 1 trauma center anywhere in Uganda, so they had to be taken to Nairobi. We put them on the one C-17 we had left because it's a jet engine aircraft. So they loaded on the back of C-17 and they were medevaced on a C-17. It's probably the first time that's ever happened in history to Nairobi. All 4 survived. Unfortunately, one lost his leg up to the hip. That's how far they had to keep amputating it. But when I climbed in the back of the lead aircraft that was trying to come in to land at Bor, there were over 100 holes in the fuselage. Of the 10 fuel tanks, 8 of them they were bullet riddled. They had to refuel it 4 times in midair so it wouldn't crash flying from Bor. So this is it's a little bit different experience than your South Sudan one, but not that much different. It's amazing all the things that we have in common, but we haven't chatted before. What I want to say is that I'd like to invite you to come back to the channel another time because, gosh, we could talk for days.
Yes, indeed. Africa is a great place to be. And I must admit, having lived in Africa all these years, I found other continents kind of boring, to be honest.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, Dr. Hammond, because as a young man, I was enlisted and I was serving in Germany during the Cold War. And I went to the education center to sign up for university classes at night and on the weekends to earn credit towards my degree with the University of Maryland and other schools. And I was sitting there and I looked over and there was this little pamphlet on the table next to me and it said the Army Foreign Area Officer Program. You get to go to graduate school and get a postgraduate degree. You get to go to school to learn a foreign language. You work as an attaché or an intelligence officer or security. I'm like, this is fascinating. That's what I want to do when I grow up. And I already had an interest in Africa because of James Michener's book, The Covenant. And also I'd studied a bit of Africa and I'd follow the wars in Mozambique, Angola, and Rhodesia. And I already had an interest in the region. So I decided I wanted to be a sub-Saharan African foreign area officer in the Army. And so that was 1984. I made a plan and my goals were to be sub-Saharan African foreign area officer. Now you don't do that right away. That's after you become a field grade officer. But to become that, make full colonel and then be military intelligence. So all the goals I set for myself in 1984, I became an intelligence officer, I became a foreign area officer for Africa, I became a full colonel. That was very fortunate because in my career field, there are almost no colonels, and so it was a big challenge to make that. There are a total of 19 people in the U.S. Army at the rank of colonel who do what I do for Africa. So it's not an easy thing to get. But no, it was quite a heck of a ride. I really enjoyed it. But I'm with you. People ask me, why Africa? And I said, well, listen, I could be Coffee Boy 26 as a lieutenant colonel at the embassy in Paris or London. Go get this for me, Colonel. Or I could be a major in Guinea or in Chad and change history and play a role in events that shape the future for millions of people. And that's exactly what happened.
Yes, indeed. By the way, I wrote a book on Sudan, Faith and Defiant Sudan, back in 1996. And I got a fatwa, a death threat fatwa for having written it from the governor of Sudan. They said Peter Hammond should expect to be shot anytime he comes back to Sudan. He should expect to be bombed because his writings make him an enemy of the state. So I thought, well, that's great. At first run, sold out at 5,000 copies. So I printed another one, doubled the size, and that sold out. So I then brought out the third edition, 3 times size the original one. And this we've had to reprint again. So it's wonderful when a government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has an article on at Governor Sudan, why church in Sudan not bombed, and in it they say that they'll make an exception in my case, they'll bomb me and shoot me anytime. So I thought, well, if they appreciate my book that much, I've really got to keep that in print. So that's been one of our, people want to know the full story of what's going on in Sudan. And on our website, frontlinemissionsa.org, I've got reports on our works in Sudan, 25 years, and we're still there. And in fact, we've got a team going very soon again. We've got ongoing work in, but I must say, it's been getting easier the last 4 years, only because of Donald Trump's administration. And I pray that that continues, because God only knows where things would go if we get another Democrat in the White House, because Clinton, Carter, and Obama were catastrophes. And it just seems Democrats cause more wars and encourage persecutors. I think it goes along with that statement. There's nothing that communists respect more than strength. There's nothing they despise more than weakness. And Ronald Reagan was respected. Carter was despised. Well, I think under Clinton, America was hated. And under Obama, even more hated and despised. But under Trump, America's been respected.
While I'm not a fan of George Bush, he also was someone that he's revered in much of Africa for the many generous programs he's had, like the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, expanding the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and many other things. Well, I'm not a big fan of George Bush, but he did more in Africa for Africans than any president in history, U.S. history, without a doubt. Trump has been diverted by wasting so many precious hours supplying documents on subpoena for fraudulent investigations, and Trumped up, no pun intended, trumped up, impeachment trials in which he was charged with no crimes. How can you impeach the president when you have no high crimes and no misdemeanors? He wasn't charged with a single crime. But that's the history we've had to deal with, and it's unfortunate. But people don't know how good they've got it until it's gone, and I think that's what we're sitting with here with Donald Trump right now. Hopefully it's not the case.
I've got an anecdote that may be interesting. Sure. A missionary friend of mine was in Kabwe in Zambia, and who should turn up but ex-President George Bush. George Bush and his wife turned up at a church plant program and was helping planting garden and building a church building there. And there would be no fanfare. There were no journalists around. He just turned up, and our missionary and his wife were absolutely shocked. And he said, the man worked hard, he's dedicated, and they saw him as a fine individual Christian. Interesting. I can't say I like George Bush's policies either, but there's no doubt that he did a lot of good for Africa, and he's loved around Africa. And we know that a lot of those policies help, but just out of the blue, never read about anywhere, but one of our missionaries saw them just turn up it was some, holiday mission, just came and worked hard, no press, no photography, no records of it. But he showed me a picture of them sitting at the table having a meal, but that was it.
Yep.
I don't know that anyone's read about that anywhere, though.
No, they haven't. And in fact, I worked in 8 different embassies in Africa and 8 tours across the continent, all corners except in the center. I never worked in the Congo, but all over North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa. And I'm aware of some of these trips that Bush has done after his presidency, and it's never with any fanfare. But by contrast, Bill Clinton leaves office and spends $7,500 a night for a lodge in the Okavango, and there's 8,000 press there to take pictures about him. And he did nothing for any of the Botswana, not a damn thing. He just showed up and was the center of attention, as that egotistical, maniacal clown is. And Bush just goes, so while I don't like Bush's policies as a human being, he's a decent human being, and we see it play out in his post-presidential time. So, interesting anecdote. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Dr. Hammond, we have the danger of running on for hours, and I suspect you have other things to do. So what I want to do is you are welcome back anytime on the channel. If you'd like to come back, I'd love to have you back. We barely scratched the surface. We didn't talk about Brockenfell. That's on the table, plus all the events taking place in South Africa, which are quite frankly a bit disturbing on so many levels. And maybe we could talk about that in another stream in the future. I was asked to bring you on, and honestly, I didn't know much about you at all. I had to do a little research, find out about you. Speaking of which, folks, if you want to learn more about Dr. Peter Hammond, look below the video. There's a description, and there's 2 links to Frontline Fellowships, and you'll learn a lot about what he's been doing, books that are on offer, and also learn about their mission and what they've been trying to accomplish across Africa. But when several, not just one, but several of my viewers kept saying, you got to get Dr. Hammond on, you get Dr. Hammond on, Dr. Hammond on. And once I got in touch and you said you'd come on, I saw that you were appearing on Scott Balson's Loving Life. And so I took a peek over there and watched, and I said, I got to get this oak on the channel. I'm glad he's already agreed to come on. Now I don't have to hunt him down. So it's very exciting to have him on the channel. It's a pleasure. Our effort here is to let people know about Africa. Of course, I have a big focus on South Africa, and about 60% of my audience is South Africa. But I do cover all the continent. And so you're a person like me that it's interested in the entire continent. So it's fascinating to have you on. I'd like to give you the final word. If there's anything you'd like to say or add or to our conversation before we head out.
Well, I think we in South Africa and Rhodesia have been a canary in the coal mine, and to a large extent, people in the rest of the world can get an idea of where the revolution wants to take you. We've lived through the revolutions. We're still living in South Africa through the second phase of the revolution. It's so important we resist the revolution. And this year, America's seen some of this revolution on the streets with BLM, Antifa, and so on. And you've certainly seen a revolutionary attempt to steal your elections with fraud that we've been used to. This is the kind of thing that we've seen in Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa. This is just standard practice of how Marxists operate, because they don't believe in right or wrong. The end justifies the means. They're situation, ethics, character. So to them, to lie, to steal, to cheat, to murder is not a problem, because they believe it's for the greater good of the socialist utopia, whatever the claptrap they're pushing today. And so we're fighting the same enemy. And let's help one another, because I think we can together be more effective in exposing and opposing and resisting the revolutionaries and their agenda. Thanks for what you're doing.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Peter Hammond. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. This is, I have to be honest, I like to do these as more of a conversation, not really an interview. And I think that's kind of how this one went. But for me, this really was a conversation. I almost just want to sit back and listen to everything you had to say. I mean, I do remember occasionally I need to ask you questions. But you're a fascinating individual. And God bless and thanks for all that you've done and all that you are attempting to do to help people around the world. It's very important, in Africa especially. Anyway, well, we'll invite you back on the program, and hopefully we'll get you back on sometime soon. So thank you very much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Peter Hammond.
Thank you so much, Chris. God bless. Keep strong, and keep your powder dry.
I will keep my powder dry. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Dr. Peter Hammond. I'll let him drop off the channel on his own there. And I'll reach out to and call him in just a couple minutes. I'm going to close out the stream behind our folks. He's saving goodbye. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. And I will close out. Thank you very much. That was Dr. Peter Hammond from Frontline Fellowship. Thank him. I want to thank him so much for being on. This was a really enjoyable stream. I really, really appreciate his presence. I had a feeling he'd go longer, but I do have another guest scheduled, so I've got to get set up for that one. And we'll invite him back on the channel. He's welcome at any time on this channel. We appreciate all that he does and all he has done. And it is interesting to hear about his experience as a young man who is kind of, a person without faith and agnostic, and look at what path his life took. Fascinating how events can change us in ways that we never anticipated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much for coming back to catch this stream that was rescheduled from yesterday. My profound apologies. I'll take the hit on that. I didn't do as good a thorough job as I should have done coordinating, and assumptions were made on both sides. And so anyway, water under the bridge. Dr. Hammond's been on now. You can watch this video at your own leisure anytime after this. Thank you so much. Thanks for the super chats that we got early in the stream. Also, thank you for the 107 likes, 137 people currently on the stream. Can you not push that up, folks, a little bit more? I mean, this was a very informative and entertaining guest. Really appreciate that. Can we smash that like button and get that like pushed up a bit higher? I want to thank you all so much for tuning into the stream today, folks. I'm going to drop off now, and I'll be back on in about 22 minutes with my next guest, Shelton Taguma, who is from Forgotten Voices, a Christian charity based here in central Pennsylvania. And it is focused on Zimbabwe, helping people in Zimbabwe. So Shelton will be on the program in just about 20 minutes. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks, and we'll catch you here. There'll also be a Night Owl stream later today. By the way, feel free to peruse the 6 videos that I made last night. I went to bed at 3 a.m. and got up again at 6, making those videos, and I didn't even finish 2 of them. I plan to do one about SABC and another one about the governor of Pennsylvania now mandating that we wear masks inside our homes. No, I'm not making that up, folks. This is not 1984. This is not Animal Farm. I'm not making this stuff up. It's not fiction. It's true. Stranger than fiction. That would be the governor whose previous orders for lockdown were declared unconstitutional by a federal district judge in Western Pennsylvania. He is doubling down now and telling us that we must wear masks inside our homes. I wonder how well that'll go. Anyway, folks, you think you got locked down bad in South Africa? Well, now we have to wear masks inside our houses. Yeah, there you go. Enjoy that, folks, with respiratory illnesses and asthma and things like that. See how that goes for you. Of course, you're not in contact with anybody who has the virus, yet these callow, feckless politicians, they're unscientific, witchcraft-believing. I'm waiting for the Salem witch trials to unfold here in Pennsylvania with the idiocy that these people believe in. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. I'll be back in 20 minutes with Shelton Taguma. And my profound thanks to Dr. Peter Hammond for coming on the channel today. It was a fantastic stream. I really enjoyed it, and I think everyone else did too. Folks, that's it for this stream. Tune in and catch us in about 20 minutes, and thank you for your time, for your patronage. Also, thanks for pushing the likes up. Got 122. Let's push to 125. 115 people still watching. Obviously, there's a few people who haven't pushed that button yet. Go ahead and do it, folks. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't cost anything. It's absolutely free. God bless, and we'll see you shortly in about 20 minutes.